In recognition of Black History Month, our program features artist and Lincoln University art professor Essex Garner speaking about his paintings and research into the unique history of the United States colored troops and Buffalo Soldiers. For several years, Essex Garner has created images that reflect on the plight of the United States colored troops and Buffalo Soldiers. Using thousands of personal photographs in the possession of descendants and others, he created his Portraits of American History series, exhibited in the summer of 2015 at Lincoln University in Jefferson City. The images in this series celebrate the academic and personal struggles of the men who served in the 62nd and 65th United States Colored Troops during the Civil War and went on to found Lincoln University. Essex Garner will share images from both this and his new series, Buffalo Soldiers of the American West, as well as the research and stories on which they are based. Garner is a professor in the Visual and Performing Arts Department at Lincoln University and is a Missouri National Guard retiree. His latest works have been exhibited in Kansas City at the Bruce Watkins Cultural Heritage Museum, in St. Joseph, at Lincoln University, and at the Missouri Army National Guard here in Jefferson City. Essex lives right here in our own capital city. Please join me now in welcoming Essex Garner to the Secretary of State's office and the Missouri State Archives.
That was a pretty good introduction. Thank you. I'm going to be talking about race. So some of you might be a little squeamish talking about race, especially here in Missouri. Say what I mean. Before I start, I was in the military. Most of you read the bio, except for Lincoln University was founded in 1866, not 1886. I was in the Army for 24 years, 7 months, 28 days, and 10 hours. I didn't like the Army, but it was the only place I could get a job, point blank. What I learned in the Army is that color does not matter, especially at night. And that's when we do our best work. They don't tell you that in the, enlistment bulletins, but this is what it's like to be in the Army. Can't tell whether you couldn't tell whether I was Chinese or blue. The only thing that matters is that I have your back, right? Turn the lights on. I wanted to get that out to you because race is the great equalizer for the military. We can learn a little bit from the military about how we're going to go forth in this 21st and 22nd century. Which leads me to why we're here. Most of you read through my bio, so we could just, did everybody get it? Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Okay. You don't have to read through all this. Well, that's a big screen. I didn't know that would be that big. Over to the mic. Have any of you ever seen this guy up here in the corner? Dr. Cornell West?
Yeah.
I met him a couple of weeks ago. Lincoln University invited him to be a guest speaker, and I read a couple of his books, Evasion of American Philosophy and Race Matters. And while I was talking to him, I said, man, I was trying to find my books, that I had when I was in school, and I forgot that I lent them to a graduate student at Mizzou, and I'll never get them back again. And I was talking to him, I said, man, I read your books. He said, which one? I said, Evasion of American Philosophy. He said, when did you read that? And I have had a unique experience. I'm not really good with this mic thing. I do most of my talking kind of loud, so I don't really know if I'm gonna really need this here. Basically, to paraphrase a lot of this here, I needed to, after I got out of the Army, I started searching for stuff to do. Met my wife, got married, had a couple of beautiful kids. They're here tonight. And I'm in Kansas City. I grew up in Kansas City. I love Kansas City, but Kansas City wasn't gonna be meant for me. Had to get out of there. And I had an option to, they gave me a heavy maintenance company, right here at Essex Garner. And I came here, did about 7 years, I retired. I liked it towards the end, but it was time to do something else. My grandmother couldn't read, so I promised her before she let me go into the Army. I went in at 17, so I had to have one of those contracts where your parents signed you in. Yeah, that was me. That was a mistake when I got you know, you don't realize when you screw up until you get somewhere. And it's a little too late for you to sign the contract, so most people in the military know where I'm going. But I made a promise to my grandmother, by virtue of her letting me go into the military, that I finished my education. Well, that's easier said than done. After about 20 years, you figure out you're not gonna be able to do this, so I wound up going to school at night everywhere I go. And finally, I had a chance to get out. I'm gonna fulfill my promise to my grandmother, which actually was a good thing. This whole series, Colored Infantry series, which led to my Buffalo Soldier series, which led to me going to Lincoln University, actually led me to meet my wife, dealt with education. And once I opened up the, she's talking to her mic. And once I opened up my mind to that I really needed to fulfill my promise to her, a lot of things just happened I never would have dreamed of. Everything I'm going to talk to you about tonight, I couldn't have made this up. Seriously. So, I graduated from Lincoln University with a couple of degrees, one in art education, and lo and behold, I have to go to Mizzou, because you can't teach in college without a master's. Come to find out, they were going to require a thesis. I didn't know what that really meant until I started really getting into it. Dr. Unrath informs me that without a thesis, I'm not going to graduate. Well, lid's off the mustard jar now. So I started thinking, what do I know? What do I do? How can I want it to be something that makes sense to me, that I can tie into my life experience, because I hate doing something just to be going through the motions of doing something, get something out of it. So I said, well, what would my thesis be on? I said, okay, let's tie in military, 1. Soldiers, 2, just happen to be black, 3. Oh, just came from a historically black university, 4. It all kind of fell into place. So I go back out to Essex Garner training site, and I meet this individual, Charles Mason. Can you go back? Some of you may know him. He's this little guy over here. I go in to meet Charles, and I say, well, I want to do some artwork dealing with the colored soldier and tie in this education thing. And he says, fine. I said, I want to do some paintings. And he says, fine. And I says, but I want to tell the story because I'm really trying to nail this thesis thing down, because they're not going to let me out of Mizzou without it. I said, well, I want to paint some images that reflect my heritage, tie in Lincoln University's heritage, but I want to tell it with historical accuracy. I didn't really like the pictures that I saw, you know, the Jim Crow, you know what the pictures look like. I said, I don't want to paint those type of pictures. He says, well, you're going to have a problem. I said, well, what's going to be a problem? He says, you're going to have models. Okay, models. Shouldn't be that big of a deal. So I said, well, what else would I need? He said, well, you're going to go into Civil War theme, you're going to need uniforms. I didn't know what was building up here. I didn't know what I was really walking into. And started having to do research. Ooh, back to this thesis thing. I said, well, Charles, how much would it cost to, outfit me? He breaks out the books because he's a military historian. And whoa, that much, huh? Original uniforms are used. So I purchased the uniform. Bought all the stuff I needed. And had the camera. Didn't have no model. Nobody was going to model for me. I couldn't get anybody to model. So I said, well, Charles, just you and me, I really became, and still am today, good friends with Charles Mission. By virtue of some things you're going to find out here in a few moments. And I order my uniforms. They come in the boxes, and I take the stuff out to the museum, and I said, this is what I got. And he said, how much did you spend? I said, don't worry about how much I spent. So I didn't worry about how much I spent, so I bought another uniform, because I didn't want the pictures just to be of me. I did not know that a lot of our history has been skewed, slanted towards the dominant race. Case in point, Bass Reeves. How many of you know Bass Reeves? 1, 2, okay. You get a goodie card for knowing who Bass Reeves is. Bass Reeves was a U.S. Marshal. Man arrested his own son. I was kidding. So I'm doing my research. Did you know that the Lone Ranger was black? I'm not making this up. Bill O'Reilly. I'm a conservative. Somewhat of a Republican. Kind of on the fence now with some of this stuff. But I'm looking at Bill O'Reilly's. So you're saying that Bass Reeves was who the story of the Lone Ranger was based on. Arrested over 3,000 people. Couldn't read. Could not read. Now, this is an emphasis on could not read. Coming from Bill O'Reilly, I like Fox News. My wife likes CNN. We, except parts of the house, we watch the news. And I'm basically floored with the information because once you start going to the state archives, those little rooms right over here, I spent some time in those rooms. See the information for yourself, the truth for yourself, and you go, whoa, wait a minute. So you're saying the Lone Ranger was black? Yeah. Next slide. That's something that's been interesting. So I get my uniforms, and I'm needing models, because I'm a painter. Nobody wants to model. I thought to myself, I said, self, this is a great opportunity, I'm going to be careful about what I'm going to say next. But I asked a great number of individuals who had to be of a specific ethnic persuasion to model for me. But what I was really asking them to do was to become a slave for a little bit. And I don't care how far you go in school, some people have a problem with that, and I had to get over that. So my problem becomes next, who going tomorrow? Well, you're looking at it. So I go back to my little buddy Charles. I said, Charles, let's do some shoots. Because I started looking around for authentic scenes. Kind of hard here in Missouri. Even though this was the worst place to be during the Civil War, the Burnt District come through here, Westport, the Secession, the Redcoats, the Union. This was the worst place to be in America during the Civil War right here in Missouri. Didn't know that, did you? That's why Jesse James went back home after the war. And it was all about trying to better themselves. Now, yes, I don't like the idea of slavery, didn't like it. They were fighting for a good reason, but it was about poor people in its totality. So, I have to come up with a thesis theme, because Dr. Unrath's not going to give me that diploma without it. So I'm going to tie in the power of education. Looking at the colored infantry soldier, getting my theme together at MU, it made sense once I started reading the archive records. It was right here. You have these enlistment contracts. I know when I enlisted in the Army, I could read mine. No problem. But now think about 1861, 1862. A slave who has the promise for freedom, the promise to freedom becomes his enlistment into the U.S. Army, into a colored regiment, and he's got to sign his enlistment contract. Once he has to sign his enlistment contract? No, he can't read, he doesn't know how to write. He puts his X. Who signs his enlistment contract? The person that owns him. Those are the people who got the money for the enlistment booty, they called it. So, you have, in essence, an individual going to the enlistment station, signing a contract that he cannot read on a promise that may not be kept. And one of my first paintings I came up with was watercolor. I called it Blind Faith. Because in essence, that's what they were, signing their enlistment contract in an environment of blind faith. Think about that. Also found out another little anomaly as I was scrummaging through the state archives here. There's a lot of good information back there. No, there really is. You got to get down in the weeds to get it, but it's back there. I found that there were a lot of white people who pretended to be black, and there were a lot of black people who pretended to be white. That's a whole nother story in itself. So this contract that I got my hands on to use as the introduction to this enlistment series, this colored enlistment series, young man up in Fulton, Missouri. Blank name, not going to say it. Signs his enlistment contract and goes to where? Benton Barracks, St. Louis, and he disappears. No discharge record, nothing. I'm like, how do you do that? And the more I got to digging in the weeds, the little archive people back here says, well, about 3 or 4 weeks to this. I said, this guy's not showing up in the 62nd. He's not showing, he enlists. He goes to Benton Barracks, but he's not showing up in the 62nd, the 65th, the 64th, the 54th. There were a whole lot of other colored units. No discharge record, no service record, didn't get shot, didn't have LOD, nothing. So he just disappeared. How do you do that? Come to find out, His name was misspelled in so many places. He gets this enlistment. His father, notice I said father, tells him this: as soon as you get up there, you get the chance, walk out. You got the money, I'll meet you back up in Kingdom City. He disappeared. So he was black enough, mulatto, to enlist. The father signs him in. And when he gets to Benton Barracks, he turns into a white person again and walks right out of Benton Barracks. I tracked that guy down for 2 years. I couldn't figure out what happened. Leave the name of the family out. That's the individual who gave me the enlistment contract asked me not to. But the guy who handed me the enlistment contract was white, which was strange. I didn't think about it until about 20 years later. What is a white person doing handing me a colored enlistment contract? If I enlist, my family has my enlistment contract black, right? How does a white person? That's your freedom papers. All right, so that's how blind faith came about. So I'm looking for models. Nobody's gonna model for me. So Charles, God bless his soul, said, we got all this nice stuff, why don't you just start taking pictures and we see what happens. They just kind of made it up as I went along. I'm not gonna make anything up. Everything I'm telling you is a fact. So we take about 100 pictures. And we're going through the records and trying to show the transition from enlistment to service when black guys didn't fight. We were using slave labor down in Louisiana, coming out of Texas, until the Army really needed us to turn the war. Then they let black soldiers fight towards the end of the war. So Charles and I go down the bottom of the hill, and we take about 80, 90 pictures, and we take a picture of this one. I use it. That's me, self-portrait. Pretty good painting. So I'm off and running up at MU. Got something going, you know. I got narrative, some images coming out. I got something, hand doctor unwrap. I'm doing this. Okay, great. That's go. You got 8 other graduate students. You are doctors. You just wanted to wrestle. When I finished the painting, I went, wow, that's not too bad. So I said, well, what am I going to do with this? I really have no idea what I'm doing. I just know I need to come up with something for my thesis. So I submitted to the Best of America, National Oil and Acrylic Painting Society. Blind jury, and I got accepted. Do you know how hard it is to get accepted into the Best of America? They're not kidding when they say the Best of America. I kid you not. It gets accepted, and I'm going, wow, that was easy. So I got accepted to the 2011 exhibit. 1,000 entries, 100 make it. You got 1 out of 10 chance of making it. I'm talking, you're up against some pretty good people. And you don't get your money back if you don't get in the show. So I get the notification that this painting made it into the Best of America. And I come back to the museum and say, Charles, look, man, I made it to the Best of America. He said, cool. I said, I need some more images though. He said, what are you gonna do? I said, I don't know. I need images that are telling the story like it is. But I gotta stay true to my theme. These guys enlisted, but they enlisted with a whole lot of things against them. Race, education, and then I can go on and on. So I said, where am I gonna get the rest of these images? So everybody I asked turned me down. They did. He said, why don't you go up to Boonville? They're gonna have a Civil War reenactment. I said, cool. So I named this one Dead Reckoning. You get about 15 seconds to shoot and reload. If you miss, well, cause, you know what I'm saying? All right, especially if it's at night, you already see what it's like at night. That's what it's really like. And I said, well, I'm going to go up to Boonville. And Charles goes, Essex, I gotta tell you something though. He said, I'm not really sure if you're gonna fit in up there in Boonville. What do you mean? He says, well, just come on up there and see what happens. I did get two gentlemen. I started asking people in the military who were out at Skelton to model for me. Notice, I'm in the picture again. Shockley and Lewis. Had to be black. This is called The Price for Our Freedom. It's watercolor. For me, watercolor on the wall, it didn't make me any difference. It's just kind of whatever mood I'm in. They agreed, and it was beautiful. If not for the fortitude of colored enlisted soldiers at Island Mound, which is a whole other category we're going to come to here in a second, there would have been no 54th, 62nd. Did you know the first battle for colored boys was fought right here in Missouri? Island Mound. Before they allowed colored people to enlist. Lane, Jayhawker out of Kansas, was gathering up freed slaves and running skirmishes in 61 and 60. And I said, really? So you had black guys who were fighting, not being paid, against the secession before the enlistment was available to the colored enlistee, and that floored me. In fact, I can't make that up. It's right there in the state archives. So these two modeled for me, and I thought that was great. And they liked the images. I gave them a couple of prints. The Price for Our Freedom, the next one. Next slide. So I get up to Boonville, Missouri, and Charles, God bless his soul, is trying to warn me that I might be the only black person up there. I didn't care. Because in the military, I was used to being the only black person. I was the first black person to retire out of the AGR system in Missouri. A whole lot of firsts. You get tired of hearing that first stuff, especially if it's you. You understand what I'm saying? So that didn't bother me. So I get up to Boonville, and I take out my uniform and get ready to do the looking for people who would want to be in scenes with me to shoot, and everybody's taking pictures of me. And I'm like, man, I was changing my clothes in the car, and people were going by click, click. They never. I'm not making this up, people. So Charles says, I want you to look for the Homes Brigade. I said, great. I'll look for the Homes Brigade. And he said, I'll let them know you were coming, and they will sit with you for some of these scenes. Because I needed soldiers to go through the process of identifying what it was really like for the colored enlisted soldier. Because you remember, they couldn't sign their contract and read it. They could sign their contract, but they couldn't read it. So their enlistment was problematic at best. You know, one thing about the military, you can't be a non-commissioned officer or an officer without being able to read. And Uncle Sam found that out about 1862. You got 40-something thousand black people, men, in uniform with weapons, giving them a general order, and they don't know what the heck you're talking about. You can't give them a general order, they can't read the thing. They can't read the thing. So I wanted to tie in this to my narrative. So I get to Boonville, and I'm looking for the Homes Brigade. I got on my uniform, I'm walking by Confederate soldiers, and they're going, hey, stop, stop, stop. You know, there's a misnomer here, and there's a double standard in the reenactments. If you are a Confederate soldier, if you're playing a role of a Confederate soldier, and let's say 10, 15 years later, you want to run for office, what do you think, what kind of pictures do you think are going to show up? The ones of you in Confederate uniform. Makes no difference if you did it just for the set. And they had another war enacted, they were a scrimmage they wanted to reenact, and then you change uniforms, and then got to a Union uniform just because they needed a body. The only picture that's going to show up is the one of you in the Confederate uniform, if you're running for office. You're okay. So there's a double standard. There's also a double standard with, I'm not going to go into that. All right, so I'm looking for the Homes Brigade, and I come across these ladies, the hood ladies, and it took me about 4 hours to get 500 yards. Because I'm telling people why I'm there, I got this Bible, because Charles won't give me a weapon. Charles, the museum director, won't give me a weapon. He'll let me, shoot the weapon at the museum, but I can't take it off the grounds. So I got the Bible. And funny thing I found out, it was my grandmother's Bible. My grandmother could read. So, funny thing happened on the way to the farm. I found out that since the colored enlistment soldier enlistee could not read, and by, let's say, divine providence, the military had to teach them to read by virtue of their rank to be able to promote them to be an NCO, that the officers had to start reading groups for their colored soldiers at night. So when they got off duty, then they would go by the campfire and read what? The Bible. Because that was the only thing that was there, or your SOP manuals, your drill manuals. Which leads me to another fact, is when soldiers get out and they go home, we'll come to they're going to start HBCUs, that's historically black colleges, but they had to learn to read the Bible first, because that's all that was there. Comes to reason, and we find out, you ever think of why towards the turn of the 20th century, most of your black leaders all had the initials Reverend in front of their name? Because these soldiers, because it's illegal to teach them to read when they come home. So they have to start private institutions of learning for their own selves, and their institutions were private, for black or poor people. Isn't that interesting? So I got my Bible, and I'm walking, and lo and behold, I come up to this little group of ladies, and I said, well, I'm looking for the Homes Brigade. And I'm telling them my story, and they says, oh, yeah, they're down the road. And this goes on for about 30, 40 minutes, and I got something I want to show you. You don't know the whole story about, how we, salute how we call to our soldiers in the field. And she said, there was about 4 of them, probably in their 60s, 70s. She said, I got something I want to show you. And then kind of get really down to business. Come on. I said, come here. It's up under my dress. And I'm talking just as they were talking to me then. And I'm thinking to myself, really? Come here. I said, lady, please. No. I said, no, it ain't gonna be that bad. And I'm thinking, Charles warned me. And they go, boom! I didn't have a mild cardiac infarction, but I thought I was gonna have one. And you know what they had under their dress? The American flag. So they were telling me the story how they would bring when the soldiers when the redlegs would come in, the men would have to go out to the woods or they'd be taken prisoner. And how they'd signal to the men that the Confederates were gone, they'd raise up their petticoat and show them the flag. My wife called me, she said, how you doing? How you doing? I said, I'm doing, what do you mean, how am I doing? She says, you all right? I said, what do you mean? She says, they ain't got you, huh? I said, come on. So I go on and I meet Chaplain. Now remember, I'm the only black, there was one guy on a camera, and I meet this Chaplain, and he's telling me the story about get it right. You could be a black officer during the Civil War if you were a chaplain or a surgeon. Well, there wasn't a whole lot of surgeons. Get back to the Bible thing. A whole lot of chaplains were commissioned officers during the Civil War. That doesn't come out These are the same individuals who come back home and start what? Their own churches, their own schools, Harris Stowe, Fisk, Lincoln University. Okay, so this is my father-in-law. I did get him the model. He's reading the Bible. I'm desperate. I got to finish my thesis. I need pictures. I need narratives. Da-da-da. And lo and behold, come to find out, you know, we got a new Supreme Court seat open. Thurgood Marshall, first black Supreme Court justice. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? So, Plessy versus Ferguson. The enlistments are up next week. The enlistments is up. These individuals are able to go home. They are in their reading groups. They have learned the rudimentary reading and writing, very little arithmetic. And they get home and they decide, and I noticed this myself as a non-commissioned officer. It didn't seem to me that the officers really had more intelligence than me when I was in the Army. The only thing they had was a degree. So I started thinking to myself, Self, when you get out of this mess, why don't you go back to school? Which leads me back here. Now I took this one, I finally get to the Homes Brigade, finally. And I didn't have a weapon, so the guys in the Homes Brigade lent me one of their muskets, Austrian musket, because the colored boys didn't get the good stuff. And Charles wasn't going to give me a musket, but I did have my Bible. And this is what we looked like in 1863 and 1864. What we really looked like. Not no television, reading a Bible. Starting to make sense now. Black churches. So, knowing that the 62nd and 65th, when they were discharged, they're coming back to Missouri, just like I thought the difference between me versus an officer, the only difference was this cat had a degree, or woman, and I didn't. You get a whole lot better respect, money. Money's important if you're an officer. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, these guys figured it out. On their way back, coming back home from Texas. War is over. They didn't know it because we didn't have cell phones at that time. So they found Lincoln University. So you get Baxter, Lieutenant Baxter, and the rest of the group. And they get their $5,000 together. And most of them donated from their service. You got to figure, most of these guys are getting what? $15, $20 a month. The majority of them gave $300, $400 of their salary to start not just Lincoln, Fisk, Harris Stowe, Tuskegee, because you know all of them getting discharged at the same time. And how I know this? In fact, go look at the starting dates of 80% of your historically black colleges. When founded, right at the end of the Civil War, 1866, 1867, 68. This isn't, I'm not making this up. So I found a friend of mine at Floyd Johnson, and we decided to go take some pictures at Lincoln. So I wanted to show what the founders of Lincoln University would have looked like if they were able to come back and walk around the campus 150 years later. They would have never dreamed that was possible. I did not know that you weren't supposed to bring weapons on campus. Okay, let's get past that. So I get my thesis, I do my graduate art exhibit. It was a blast. And wow, that was all in 1 year. St. Joseph, Gaines Museum. I'm not even sure how many exhibits I did during that year. Got invited to the Magic House. They pay really good as a visiting artist to do a chalk art demonstration. And these are some of the people I met. Next slide. I know it's a lot to digest, but that was in 1 year. So I get my diploma. My mentor at Lincoln University, hey, would you like to start teaching? I said, you kidding me? He said, yeah. I said, sure. So I started teaching at Lincoln, became a faculty member. And somebody from the Department of Natural Resources contacted me, and I met these individuals at Island Mound. And they're telling me about the Buffalo Soldier. My thesis is over. I'm done. I'm really done. And I go, yeah, this is kind of interesting. This is JR and Tom. Next slide. So I start painting them, and I get into the, I go for another application to the Best of America and got turned down. That was probably the best thing that happened to me, to be rejected from the Best of America, to feel that rejection. And humility set in, right? So I painted this Indian, indigenous man. This is the only real American. Everybody else is at ease. These are the only real Americans. But he did not make it. And I skipped in the notes. Next slide. But the next year I submitted him again and he got accepted. Isn't that strange? So art becomes subjective. So meeting JR and Tom, I start painting them. I have no idea what my colored infantry series is done. I don't know. So I'm just doing this for fun at this point. And I started noticing some similarities. What happened to the colored infantry soldier after the war was over? They just disappeared? No. JR represents the 10th Cav, Tom represents the 9th Cav. Next slide. Started thinking about manifest destiny. Well, what did the colored soldiers do while they was out there as Buffalo soldiers? Every day in the military didn't suck. Most of it did, but I got to see some pretty nice places. And I started looking through the prism of 140 years, 150 years, of what would these soldiers have seen? What would they have been able to do? And this was called Approaching Storm. So I took the picture of Tom from the Island Mound dedication, and I took the picture of JR from the Island Mound dedication, and usurped them over Manifest Destiny, the black version of Manifest Destiny. And this is what I came up with. The Badlands. They would have had to go through there, wasn't no other way to get there. And they would have had to go through the Nevada territories, the Colorado territories. What would they have looked like? And they were beautiful and their clothes were. That's the only thing I wanted. So I'm becoming good friends with these guys. Next slide. Well, because of my affiliation with JR, he gives me this hat. He likes my paintings. I don't really care what they do with them. He gives me this hat. That's pretty cool. And so I said, I'm gonna do some more paintings, but I said, where are the horses, man? Come on, you guys supposed to have horses somewhere, right? So this one is entitled Crossing Over. And you can see the horses in the background because JR is not showing me the horses. I know they got stables because they are the 9th and 10th Cavalry, the chapter. Where are the horses, JR? No, you can't give me the horses. So I do this exhibit at the Bruce Watkins Cultural Center. Didn't know that it was funded by Ollie Gates. Notice how I said that just simply. That's about as simple as I can put it. This show was a success. I meet some more people in the Natural Resource Center who want to know if I want to do some more research. but I'm still painting, so I submit this one to the Best of America. It got accepted. Man, I'm getting hot now. You know, I can smell my stuff. I got jury in it, it's the Best of America. That's what you call a signature artist. Next slide. And I met some really nice people. But what I wasn't really paying attention to was the people that I were meeting were influencing my career, and I didn't even know it. They were opening doors for me and going, anytime you want to walk in or by, and just walked out, kind of left the door wide open. All I had to do was walk in or something. I meet James Madison. He was the original founder, the original chapter of the Buffalo Soldiers. This guy founded it. And that's Bill Clinton. Some of your original chapter members. And I'm getting a chance to talk to Mr. Madison, to use a distinguished metaphor, from the horse's mouth. He was an actual Buffalo soldier. And it was something to meet him. Disregard the Alzheimer's thing. And he had a beautiful daughter. And that's what he would have looked like. And he told me point blank what he went through. He was in a horse company. What did the horse company turn into? The cavalry. Mechanized cavalry. They got rid of horses, but that's another story. Next slide. So I get a chance to meet Mr. Madison. And that was a really beautiful experience. Now all of a sudden, they're having their little meetings in Texas, Colorado, Leavenworth, Kansas City. And I said, come on guys, where are the horses? And I get this, mysteriously one day this disc shows up at my house. And it has over 200 pictures. Them riding horses in uniform, in ranks, out of ranks. And I get to meet this guy here, his name is Paul McCowan. He was a retired school teacher. And Tony Johnson. And they have some, I said, you guys had these pictures all along? I guess they had to trust me first. Isn't that strange? Next slide. I like to, that's called hasten, I'll hasten to your throne. Listen to Whitney Houston. Back to those, that's a shame what happened to her. So I have another exhibit. Might as well. I'm doing some painting. So I do an exhibit called Blue on Black. Blue on Black. Get it? It's a rock and roll song. And this is Tony Johnson and the Johnson brothers. I get them confused. I really do. I get them confused. But I get this disc and I'm starting to get calls from Dick, the president. Man, thanks for the images. I'm sending them prints. And wow, I'm like getting all these new friends. I didn't ask for them. They're great people. And it was a wonderful experience meeting Mr. Madison. Next slide. Next slide. We don't want to get into all that. This was Buffalo Soldiers American West. Race matters. See any black people in this photograph? There are none. I'm just going to give you a hint. This is what I'm learning from these guys. When we think about Buffalo Soldier, what do you think about? When I say Buffalo Soldier, what comes to mind? Black guy, right? Oh, got a car. Do you know that, there were white officers, because whites could only be the officers, right? Or white NCOs. But there were Hispanic, a lot of Hispanics in the Buffalo Soldier ranks. There were a lot of illiterate white boys in the Buffalo Soldier ranks. About a quarter of the unit wasn't black. And I called Dick up in Colorado. I said, hey, tell me the names of the guys, because I want to get the, for the picture. He says, well, that's Cruz, that's the lieutenant, that's me. They didn't know who the guy in the back was. To this very day, we still don't know who he is. But I said, well, Dick, where are the black people? He said, they're not. Isn't that interesting? Next slide. Next slide. Mr. Madison dies. Oh. Next slide. And I get this strange phone call from the new president of the chapter, Kansas City. Remember the guy I painted originally? JR. He says, hey, you're gonna come up and be a pallbearer. I said, seriously? I said, yeah. He said, Mr. Madison would want you to be his daughter wants you to be a pallbearer. I said, I didn't tell him. I said, I didn't know him that well. He says, yes, you did. And that's me in the back. Next slide. That's me in the center, and I'm the only one in my 50s. Everybody else is in their 70s and 80s. There's only 4 Buffalo soldiers in the greater Kansas City area that are still alive. There was a tie-in, though. You know that the Buffalo soldiers had the same illiteracy rate that the colored infantry regiments had? Very few of them could read or write. And I thought about that. And they gave him a beautiful funeral. I hate to think about my funeral, but his was pretty good. Next slide. And that was an honor. And they even thought of me to do that. So next year rolls around, I got nothing else to do. I'm teaching. I said, I'll keep painting them. I said, hey, Dick, we'll do another picture of you. I see one I like. Paint it. Models are coming out of the woodwork now. So this is Colorado Pass, our first sergeant did, and cruise down Metro. It makes it into the best of America. Man, just by attention to detail, taking my work seriously, and following that education thing, the same reason that the colored infantry started throughout the Buffalo Summer. And I'm getting some really great images. And I'm starting to get serious about this. I keep getting into the show, and this thought comes to my mind and says, why don't you stop trying to get in the show and win the thing? You ever have a moment of clarity? You do something and say, I've been doing it. Why don't you start trying to paint to win? The Dean Mitchell approach to art. Next slide. And here we are. So I said to myself, let's keep this going. So I got Paul, he's on the hook for me. He doesn't care what I paint now. I got another disc that showed up from Texas. Then another disc that showed up. Yeah, from Leavenworth. I got over 3,000 pictures. Now remember when I started this? I couldn't pay somebody to buy. Isn't that interesting? So now this show here is Into the Wind, and that's exactly where I want this show to go. All these paintings are going to go to Bruce Watkins Cultural Center. Thank you, Ollie Gates. For 10 years. We were going to go 25. Jared talked to me about common sense. You just heard that. I guess this will be recorded. They're looking for a new museum director. I found out that the Lone Ranger was actually black. I got a master's degree. Kept my promise. This painting probably means nothing to a lot of people. It's a front porch. We're all soldiers trying to get back to. You know, front porch. If you see all that crap that you have to go through, I just want to go home. And I thought about that. Next slide. I think this is it. I almost hit the 50-minute mark. I was trying to get it to 45 minutes. I told I wasn't going to make it. So here we are. One last thought, though. Lincoln University is, here's his word. This new word that came out of the blue. I didn't even know this one was coming. Centennial. Centennial. I actually had to practice that to be able to say that. So Lincoln's doing their Centennial, founded in 1866. September 17th, 1866. First day of classes. Hobo Hill. Y'all know where Hobo Hill is? Simonson. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for showing up. I think you talked. I don't know. He told me about Ela. Hold on. I'm gonna give you a card. He asked me to do a portrait of him. we might get around to this.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So he was a music professor at Lincoln University after 30 years, 40 years. Tatum, 30, good God. Okay, he hired me. So, but listen to this. Now this is tying in the power of education. They got it then. God, I hope my children get it now. First day of class, September 17th, 1866. You know what the first formation they had for the 9th Cavalry in Leavenworth was 4 days later? The Buffalo Soldier was founded September 21st, 1866. So who's all celebrating Assessment Centennial here? In 1 week. How long would it have taken to get from, now this is 1866, 1867, how long would it take to get from Jefferson City or places in Missouri to Leavenworth? If you were a black kid and you just got your discharge papers and you're now free, you got nothing else to do, you're a professional soldier, head on up to Leavenworth. They're hiring up there. It's called professional soldier. I did it. 4 days later. Now, if you look closely on the enlistment registry, there's a whole lot of names that match the discharges from the 62nd, 65th, 54th. I can go on and on from Missouri, Oklahoma, and they went right to Leavenworth. Now, they couldn't go out of Louisiana because that was the 10th Cavalry. Isn't that interesting? So as we're celebrating Assessment Centennial for all these historically black colleges, in Lincoln especially, everybody's kind of missing the fact that 4 days later, the Buffalo Soldiers formed the regiments. I think that's it. And please go show up for homecoming. How do we do? I think I'm supposed to ask you a question. So we'll open this up to questions. And there you go. I couldn't have made that up. There's no way that, it's kind of an injustice for me to try and blow through all that in 50 minutes, 45, I'm 5 minutes over.